The story of Pesach is a story that moves us to search for the core of who I am as a person. We understand the large themes, and we go through them every year, and every year we see more and more. But the repeating question of who am I as a person in my core, and the things around me that have power. What has power, and how does that power manifest? And this continues to move through the Torah, through the Pesach story, through the holiday of Pesach, over and over again. It starts with Moses against Pharaoh. The idea of saying, where is the power and how are we seeing it manifesting? When we look at the leader, Pharaoh, the leader of an empire, and Moses, who was raised in that household and chosen by God now to be a leader. And what do we see with power when they face each other, when power faces power? And first of all, when we look at Moses, Moses said to God very plainly, I don't want to do it at all, but I certainly can't do it alone. And so Aaron, his brother, is now sent as a support. And Moses and Aaron are both told, when you go to Egypt, seek out the elders. Find the Israelite elders and speak to them first, and then go with them to Pharaoh. And so we're looking at this and we're thinking, oh my goodness, that's a lot of people that are now being included in this first meeting over with Pharaoh. And what we're seeing is we're seeing a leadership model. So we're seeing power that is collaborative. Power that is not just sitting in Moses, but Moses immediately says, I don't want all this power to sit just with me. And so a sibling is sent to him. And God then says, and the two of you go get elders, because power needs to diversify, and it needs to be more than just the two of you. And so we see that it starts to manifest collaboratively when it comes to Moses. The other thing is there's transparency. Everything that is being said and done is being said and done publicly. It's Moses, for having been raised in the palace, speaks the Egyptian dialect that Pharaoh speaks, and that everyone standing there in the palace speaks. There's total understanding of all of it. There's total transparency and communication. And it's a model of leadership that we really haven't seen before. And it's shaping right in front of our eyes as this is happening. Then we look at Pharaoh. And what is his model of leadership? As Moses is encountering, what is his power? First thing he does when he hears all of this is he calls in the sorcerers. And the sorcerers, we're told, are now speaking their incantations, which means we have no idea what they're speaking. Nobody knows what they're speaking. It's this eerie language that is reserved for the sorcerers and the priesthood and that level of what is definitely meant and kept in mystery. So the average person can't understand it and can't pierce it. There is no transparency, and there is no access or invitation for anybody else to engage. It's totally opaque. And when Pharaoh finally understands what's going on, first thing he does is cut the supply lines to the slaves, but not the quota, so that in fact they still have to produce as many bricks, but now they have no supply lines coming to them. They're going to have to go and get all of the supplies and the materials they needed and continue to produce the same amount of bricks. What's the point of that? Divide and conquer. Get Israel angry at Moses and Aaron, at the elders, and it works. They do get mad at them, and they say, you've made our lives worse. You haven't made our lives better. That is Pharaoh's strategy. It is his tactic. His tactic of power and leadership is you hold on to it by engaging in divide and conquer. Moses has brought a new model that no one quite knows what to do with, and that's the model of collaborative leadership and transparency. But it's not working. Pharaoh's is working, because Pharaoh's power will succeed with that. The base of his power is brutality. Cut those supply lines and then beat the slaves if they drop the quota. Kill them. It's power by brutality. It will work, and it is working, and it has worked. Moses' model is more fluid. It allows for more problems to appear, and as we watch the story unfold, more problems do appear. When you have collaborative leadership, when you have transparency, it's an invitation for more voices, which is an invitation for more problems to appear. But it's a model that will sustain and does not have to head to brutality. That's the choice that's put before us immediately as we start to understand Pesach and the setting of it. What are we seeing when we see those two leaders looking at each other? we would opt for Moses. We would want to belong to that group of leadership because in that group of leadership, I get a voice and I don't have to head to be the victim of brutality. We see it happen again in other parts of the same narrative, in Exodus, in Pesach, in our Haggadot, everywhere. We're watching two strands of leadership that are moving parallel, and we're looking at two different models, and it's the men and the women. What's going on throughout is the men are Pharaoh and the taskmasters, and certainly there are women there, but the text is not giving them to us. The base of the power is the male. And even the Midrash engages in this, because the Midrash says that when Pharaoh gave that decree that all the baby boys should be killed, the Midrash says that all the husbands separated from their wives. They didn't want to risk having a baby, and so they simply separated out for the risk of perhaps having a baby. And then Miriam, as a little girl, according to the Midrash, comes to her father and says, "How dare you? You're making it worse than Pharaoh, because Pharaoh only targeted the baby boys. You're actually stopping any babies, boys or girls. You're playing by his rules, and you're making it worse." And because Miriam speaks up, her parents reconcile, and Moses is born. So Miriam is credited for being life-affirming in the face of what we've watched as a power base that is masculine, that is heading to cut life short wherever it can. Pharaoh and the midwives. Pharaoh turns to the midwives and says, "You've got to kill those babies as they're born and then present it to the mothers as a stillbirth or I'll have a revolution on my hand. So I need you to lie to those mothers, kill those babies." And the midwives refuse. And again we see that the feminine voice is life-affirming, while Pharaoh's voice tries every way it can to cut life short. And as we continue to watch through, we see that Moses' mother hides him, saves him, puts him into the Nile in a basket to try to save him. His sister stands to stand guard to guard him, and the daughter of Pharaoh sees him, comes down, picks him up, identifies him as a Hebrew baby, and we fully expect her to drown him now, because that's the law of the land. It's her father that said that's the law of the land, and she doesn't. She saves him, and she goes to great lengths to save him. And now we're watching two power bases that are shifting, and they're working at odds with each other. Pharaoh and the masculine voice is the powerful one that asserts a power of destruction. The feminine voice has subversive power. It is in fact Moses' mother who is subverting the law by saving him and putting him on the Nile. It is Pharaoh's own daughter that is saying, "I'm not going to kill him." And so we have subversive power that can't unite. It's not going to get anywhere. It's going to stay underground. It's going to stay as singular voices. And so, in fact, it gains no followers. But we see it. The text shows it to us. And of course, ultimately, the power of God or the power of Pharaoh. And those two are brought together in the clash of what we know happens in Egypt. Pharaoh is the god of Egypt. God is the God of the universe. And the two are now going to come with both powers face to face. God brings Israel out of Egypt and engages Pharaoh by Egypt's definition of things. Engages Pharaoh with brutality. Everything we just said is the base of Egypt's power, is brutality. The plagues speak to Pharaoh and Egypt because they're brutal. We have a problem with it, and we should have a problem with it, and Midrashim have a problem with it. What is going on? There's too much human suffering going on. Just take Israel out. But the question is the engagement itself. And in the ancient world, you want a worthy opponent. If you do not have a worthy opponent, then they've actually disrespected you. And so God engages with Pharaoh by Egypt's terms, by Egypt's definitions, and those are the definitions of brutality. The brutality will allow Pharaoh to come out of this and continue to exist in the ancient world because he was beaten by the most formidable of enemies. How could he not lose? And how could the ancient world not help but admire the fight he put up in the brutality that was brought to his empire? The brutality is what honors him in the ancient world. We're the ones who have a problem with it. The difference between God and Pharaoh is seen immediately. When Moses is at the burning bush and God says to him, you got to go down and you got to tell the people and it's time and I'm getting them out and the whole plan is laid up. And Moses responds by saying, what's your name? They're going to want to know what your name is. So you need to tell me your name so I can tell them what your name is. And in fact, we get God introducing by name, to Moses and saying, go tell them that's my name. It's a crucial moment because we never know Pharaoh's name. We only know him as Pharaoh. In history, we know he's Ramses, but the text never identifies him as such. And in fact, the story begins by saying a new Pharaoh came to Egypt, arose in Egypt, because the old Pharaoh died, and we don't know his name either. We don't know their names. We only know their titles. Pharaoh. And the first thing Moses says to God is, you want a relationship with these people? You give me a name, because it's personal. Titles aren't personal. I can't engage with a title. I engage by name. And Moses immediately says to God, this has to be personal. Because with God, this will always be personal. And with Pharaoh, it will never be personal. And we see it in the text, and we see it in the Midrashim. The Egyptians are begging Pharaoh to get us out. They're the ones suffering. And they come over and over and say, make this stop. And he ignores them because it's never personal. It's only ever about his title. And his title is he's the head of the empire, and empires don't cave. So he actually has a hand in destroying his own people and his own country. God protects Israel through the plagues. It's personal. It isn't just about facing Pharaoh in a clash of titans. It's about protecting your own people, because that's what leadership is. That's what that model of collaborative leadership, transparency, engagement, I have a voice, that's what that means. And we see it happening right away, where the Egyptians have no one to turn to, and God is protecting Israel. Ultimately, in that last plague, it's made clear to everyone, Egyptians included, here is how you can remain safe. You remain safe by painting your doorway with the blood of the sheep and stay inside. You'll be safe. Why? Because the sheep is a demigod in Egypt. And therefore, any Egyptian could choose at that moment to say, I recognize that Pharaoh can't protect me, won't protect me. I'm invested in a model that dooms me. So I'm going to choose this one, and I'm going to publicly acknowledge it by sacrificing what Pharaoh thinks is a demigod. And in fact, we're told that many Egyptians do that and find freedom with us as we leave. So the question of looking for the core, and we've talked about these power bases, and we've talked about this versus this, and we've looked at all of the themes that are unfolding in front of us to ask, who has the power? Why do they have the power? And how is it manifesting? The question then becomes, so how do I resolve it all? Is it just going to be separate threads and separate disparate moments that make no sense to me? How do I move through this? How do I resolve it? And it resolves at the Red Sea. It resolves with what we've read of what happens at the Red Sea, because two things are happening at the same time. And they're being told to us in two different ways. The first way is the narrative. The Torah describes to us what happened. The narrative talks about how Israel approaches the sea. God instructs Moses, and then God brings a fierce wind that's going to part those waters, and Israel's going to go on dry land, and Israel's going to pass through a dry canal with water everywhere, only to come out on the other side as a nation. They entered as slaves. They're being born. It's a strong birth image. It's the image we recognize. It's done that way so that we'll recognize it. Otherwise, God should put us on eagles and fly us over. We've got that going on in the Torah too. But this image is one we'll remember. This is one we'll understand and relate to. It's where we're being born. and it's a strong female image. But when we look at the song at the sea, when we get to the other side and we sing a praise, we're identifying God masculine. We're saying, what a warrior, Ish Milchama, man of war. We're very specific that it's Ish, it's man. And how he vanquished the enemy. The same moment, the same action that creates the female birth image, creates the male power image, the one that affirmed life, the one that cut life short. They're both happening at the same time, at the same moment, in the same place. And the Torah is showing it to us. It's telling us this is how you resolve it. The gender divide we saw earlier, where there was power and powerlessness, subversive power that could gain no following, power that directed horribly toward brutality, it merges here to create the one singular moment. Leadership must be both, we're told. It must be the narrative and it must be the song. It's why at the end of everything we see Miriam, Moses' sister, step forward, and the women follow her. Now the female has followers. And Miriam sings the same words that Moses sang and steps into leadership that will now be her role as we move forward. And we now have balanced leadership when we look at those siblings. That's the model that is being presented to us as soon as we walk out of Egypt. Miriam is leading women who are beating drums. Drums are heartbeats, they are rhythms. This is the female expression that affirms life, and it happens at that same moment. We learn about the core of leadership when we look at those moments. When Pesach pushes us and says, what's your core? Do you hear the voice of the other? Do you hear the voice of subversive power? Do you hear the voice of people who are affirming wonderful things, but they can't gather because the powers that be have subdued? We are told later on never to return to Egypt as a people. Egypt is a culture in the ancient world that empowers itself through death. Fulfillment is gained through death. Deity is gained through death. There is the Book of the Dead. A lot of focus and attention is paid to it, and the entire culture sits and grows from there. The Torah continuously pulls the other way and tells us, choose life, affirm life, celebrate life, never go back to Egypt, because it's the opposite direction. It's the power that tries to cut life short. You must affirm life all the time. And we drink to life. We toast l'chaim. We bring it into our daily celebrations. We don't even have to celebrate. We'll just pour a l'chaim, and then we'll say l'chaim, and it will become a celebration. Every time we do it, we reject Egypt again. That's what we're supposed to be doing as we move forward. The lessons and the themes of Pesach are layered, and they're endless. Certainly the central theme of redemption and freedom speaks to us, but we always want to remind ourselves that the lessons of Pesach also include balanced leadership. Are we including the voice of the other? Transparent power, so there is always access to process, and we're never suddenly surprised by outcome. Personal identity. Am I my name, or am I living as a title? For today, one of the strongest themes that we see is in this moment where we all sit. I ask myself in my core, do I affirm life and choose it, even when it's not a toast, and even when making that choice is not easy, it's hard. When it's harder than I ever imagined it to be, can I affirm life? When it makes me lonely and crazy, can I secure life? When I have to wait in my home to get protection because others who are more vulnerable should be protected first, can I choose it at that moment as well? When I'm tempted to give it all up because I've just had enough, and all I want is that hug, and all I want is that person I'm waiting to hug, and I want to hold them, and I want to smell them, and I want to rock them in my arms. Can I choose life then and stay away? The lessons of Pesach aren't easy. Not then, not now. But the Torah tells us so many times to leave Egypt behind us, to choose life, to explore the core of who we are, always keep our eyes looking forward. And, of course, freedom and redemption happen along the way. Chag Sameach.